She paid just $3,700 for an abandoned garage on the edge of town, broken, empty, and barely standing. Clara Monroe, a struggling mechanic girl, thought she was buying a place to fix cars and survive. But hidden beneath the cracked floorboards was a classic car collection so rare, so untouched, it was valued at over $100 million. What began as a desperate investment turned into a life-changing discovery, one that would unlock a forgotten legacy, revive a dying town, and transform a mother's quiet grit into something legendary. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The mist rolled off the Blue Hollow Hills like breath from an old soul, curling low around the vacant corner lot where the lumber mill once echoed with life. Clara Monroe guided her beat-up Chevy Suburban into the gravel driveway of the cottage she rented just outside town. The engine gave one final cough before falling quiet. Through the cracked windshield, she saw her daughter, 10-year-old Evelyn, pressed against the front window, her small hands fogging up the glass as she waited. Clara, only 29, but worn like someone twice her age, stepped out into the cool morning air. Her hands were calloused from years under hoods, her nails permanently stained with grease. Every movement carried the weight of a single mother's exhaustion and unwavering love. Mama Evelyn burst through the door, her hug as fierce as it was warm. She smelled like vanilla shampoo and after-school dreams. "Guess what I made today?" Clara smiled as she picked her up despite her aching back. "Tell me." Evelyn beamed. "A garage for my toy trucks? It has a hidden room where the secret trucks live." Clara's throat tightened. Even Evelyn understood some things are too precious to leave out in the open. That evening, after supper, hamburger helper stretched with leftover pasta and frozen peas, Clara helped Evelyn with her homework at the rickety kitchen table. The overhead bulb buzzed faintly. The place was small, drafty, and patched together with hope and duct tape. But it was theirs. They laughed over Evelyn's spelling words, but Clara's mind was elsewhere. The rent was due in 5 days. The garage she leased on the edge of town, the one she barely kept afloat with oil changes and brake jobs, needed a new compressor. Again, she excused herself and stepped outside for some air. The wind coming off the hills had a bite to it. Clara lit a cigarette, even though she'd promised herself she'd quit. The stars were faint tonight. She closed her eyes, feeling the ache in her lower back, the weight behind her eyes. Then she remembered the flyer. She'd seen it pinned to the bulletin board at Thompson's gas and feed garage for sale, $4,000 or best offer. Needs work, serious inquiries only, no photo, just an address, Milner Road. No one had worked out there in years. Folks around town said it was haunted or cursed. Clara didn't believe in either, just poor insulation and unpaid taxes. She went back inside and pulled the flyer from her purse. The paper smelled like grease and tobacco, probably from whoever posted it. Evelyn was fast asleep on the couch, one hand still wrapped around a pencil. Clara stared at the number at the bottom of the page. She didn't know what made her do it, but she dialed. A man answered on the third ring. "Yeah. Hi. I'm calling about the garage on Milner." "You want to see it?" Clara hesitated, then said, "Yeah, I think I do." By sunrise the next morning, she was standing in front of it. The place looked every bit as forgotten as she'd imagined. The siding was sun-bleached and curling. The bay doors were rusted shut. A faded sign hung crookedly above the entrance, Whitaker Auto, Est, 1959. The man from the phone, Red Callahan, was already there, thin as wire and wrapped in a denim jacket 2 sizes too big. "She ain't pretty," he said, unlocking the padlock. "But she's dry, And the roof don't leak much. Inside, it was a cave of shadows and stale air. Clara stepped through carefully, boots crunching broken glass and dried leaves. The light filtered through dust-coated windows. And in that soft gold, she saw more than a ruin. She saw steel beams that hadn't rusted, concrete floors that hadn't cracked, and tools. Dozens of tools hung neatly on pegboards like someone had walked away mid-shift and never come back. "I'll take it," Clara said before she could talk herself out of it. Red blinked. "You don't want to think it over?" "No," she said. "I've already thought too much this year." She paid him on the spot. $3,700, her savings, down to the last dime. Red handed her one key and one warning. "Folks say Bernard Whitaker never let anyone past that back wall. Said there were things in here best left alone." Clara tucked the key into her pocket. "Well, lucky for me. I'm too broke to be superstitious." Later that night, after Evelyn went to bed, Clara returned to the garage with a flashlight and a crowbar. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe closure. Maybe a distraction from the rent she no longer had money to pay. She walked the length of the shop, brushing cobwebs off shelves, checking the corners. Then, near the compressor tank, she saw something odd, a seam in the concrete wall. Faint, hairline, almost invisible. She tapped it, hollow. There was no handle, just a circular keyhole. She pulled Red's key from her pocket. It looked too plain, too old. But she tried it anyway. Click! Something shifted deep in the wall. The seam cracked open an inch, then another, and the wall slid inward. Behind it was a stairwell. Stone steps, descending into darkness. Clara's fingers trembled on the flashlight. She hesitated, heart racing. But then she remembered Evelyn, asleep on their threadbare couch, and the $3,700 that now only bought her dust and questions. She stepped down, one step at a time. The darkness swallowed her whole. Clara moved down the stone steps slowly, one hand trailing along the damp concrete wall, the other gripping the flashlight like it was a lifeline. The air grew colder with each step, musty and sharp, like old leather and forgotten oil. At the bottom, the beam of her flashlight swept across a cavernous space. She gasped. Rows of shapes stretched into the shadows, large, curved, covered in heavy cloth. Dozens of them. Hoods, fenders, windshields. She stepped closer. The soft echo of her boots the only sound in the underground vault. She reached the first shape, fingers trembling, and slowly peeled back the cover. Her breath caught in her throat. A Ferrari, cherry red, polished to perfection. Its body gleamed beneath a layer of time, untouched by dust or age. The chrome detail shimmered under the flashlight, reflecting her wide-eyed expression back at her. Clara stumbled back. She rushed to the next one, pulled back the cover, a Porsche 356, then another, a Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing. She ran down the row now, one after the next. Bugatti, Aston Martin, Shelby Cobra, Jaguar XK120. It was like walking through the dreams of every car lover on Earth. She stopped in the center of the room and turned in a slow circle. They were everywhere. At least 30 of them. Every cover she pulled revealed something rarer, something impossible. Some of these cars she had only ever seen in magazines. Some she'd thought were lost to history. Each vehicle had a small brass plaque beside it. Each plaque had a year, a model, a restoration note, all meticulously kept. At the far end of the underground room, there was a desk, an old-school, solid oak kind of desk. Clara approached it cautiously, her legs still shaky. On top, a leather-bound ledger sat open. She brushed the dust off and leaned in. Collection log. Bernard Whitaker. Every car was listed. Purchase date. Parts used. Hours logged. Condition. Current value. At the bottom of the last page, one line had been added in shaky handwriting. Collection complete. 34 vehicles. Estimated total value $108,300,000. Secure until ready. Clara sat down hard in the wooden chair behind the desk, her breath shallow, heart pounding. $108 million. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if that would stop it from hammering out of her ribs. Her fingers trembled against the page. This wasn't a garage. It was a sanctuary. A museum? A time capsule sealed away beneath a crumbling shop on the edge of a forgotten town. And for reasons she couldn't begin to understand, it now belonged to her. She looked back at the cars, silent and regal under their fitted covers. Why would Whitaker hide all this? Why not sell one, just one, and live comfortably? Why entomb a fortune while the town around him faded? Clara's eyes burned, not from the dust, from the enormity of it, from the weight of what she'd stepped into. A mechanic with grease under her nails, behind on rent, raising a daughter alone, now sat in the middle of a secret worth more than the entire town of Blue Hollow combined. And no one knew. No one. Back upstairs. The morning light had begun to seep through the broken window panes. Clara sat in the driver's seat of her Suburban, hands gripping the wheel, staring out at nothing. A million questions swirled in her mind. Was it legal? Could she even touch those cars? Did the world out there have any idea what was under her feet? She reached over and opened the glove box. Pulled out the flyer she'd first seen at Thompson's. She stared at the price again. $4,000. She let out a short, shaky laugh. What the hell did I just buy? The morning haze hadn't yet lifted from Blue Hollow when Clara stepped back into the garage. She'd barely slept. Her dreams had been a tangled mess of spinning tires and flickering headlights, of Evelyn asking questions Clara couldn't answer. She stood silently in the bay, breathing in the cold, oil-stained air. The garage didn't feel the same anymore. Yesterday, it had been an old building she could barely afford. Today, it was a vault, a secret, a burden. She turned on her flashlight and descended the stone steps again, each one heavier than the last. She walked past the Ferrari, past the Jaguar, past the Shelby Cobra gleaming beneath its dust-streaked tarp. They didn't shock her anymore. What shook her now was the why. Why were they here? Why her? At the oak desk. She opened the ledger again, hoping there was something she missed. She flipped back a few pages. And there it was, half a page, written in a different hand. Sloppier? More personal? If you're reading this, then I didn't make it. And if you bought this place, then you've already paid more than I ever asked from anyone in my life. These cars, they were supposed to be my redemption, my apology to the world I abandoned. But life got small. Time ran out. I hid them because people ruin beautiful things when they chase money. Maybe you're different. Maybe you'll do what I couldn't. Clara read it 3 times before she could move. Her fingers gripped the page like it might vanish. Her throat tightened. She wasn't just standing in someone's legacy. She was holding a second chance. Not just for her, but for what this place could mean to others. Back upstairs. She opened the bay doors and stood in the sunlight. She stared at the road. No one was coming. No one knew. She could keep the secret. Sell the cars off slowly, quietly, pay off debt. Move Evelyn into a real home. Maybe even buy a house with a porch swing and working heat. But something about that felt wrong. These cars weren't just assets. They were stories. They were memories made of metal and craftsmanship, each one touched by hands that had cared. Someone had poured love into every curve, every engine, every chrome mirror, and Whitaker had chosen to hide them from the world. Until now? Clara looked down at her grease-stained hands. Hands that had twisted bolts, rebuilt carburetors, and bled for every dollar earned. She wasn't rich, but she understood machines. And now, maybe she understood purpose, too. That night, after Evelyn had gone to bed, Clara sat at the kitchen table, staring at her laptop. She opened a new tab and typed, "How to open a private car museum." She didn't know the first thing about trusts, preservation permits, or how to explain a $100 million collection to the IRS without getting arrested. But she knew someone would. She wasn't going to sell them. She was going to protect them, show them, honor them. The next morning, Clara packed Evelyn's lunch with a smile on her face. She didn't know she still had. "Mama," Evelyn asked as she zipped her backpack, "can we fix up the garage more? Make it pretty." Clara knelt in front of her, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Yeah, baby," she said softly. "We're gonna fix it up real nice." She stood at the front door as Evelyn climbed onto the school bus, her little hand waving through the window. Clara turned back toward the garage. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a mission. Clara stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom of Thompson's Gas and Feed, adjusting the collar of her old flannel shirt like it was a blazer. The PTA meeting room next door buzzed with casual conversations and the hum of a percolating coffee pot. She didn't belong there, not really, but it was the only place in Blue Hollow where people actually listened. She took a deep breath, checked her teeth for the third time, and stepped into the room. The folding chairs creaked under denim and work boots. At least a dozen people from around town had shown up, mechanics, retired teachers, the sheriff's wife, even old man Richie who hadn't left his porch since the 4th of July parade. They all turned when Clara walked in. She cleared her throat. Thanks for coming. I know y'all probably thought this was about potholes or school bake sales or something, but I got something a little different." The room quieted. Clara took a beat. "I bought the old Whitaker garage last week." That earned a few murmurs. Someone chuckled. "I went in thinking it was just a broken-down shop. Needed a new compressor. Floors buckled. Wiring shot. But I found something. Underneath it." The room leaned in. A vault, a sealed collection, 34 classic cars, all restored, all hidden away by Bernard Whitaker. Silence. Ferraris, gull-wings, Cobras, real stuff. Over $100 million worth, by the look of it. Dead silence. Then a scoff. "You hittin' the sauce, Clara." "No," she said, holding her ground. "I've got proof. I brought photos." She walked to the table and laid out a series of printed pictures. Each car shimmered beneath the fluorescent's rich red, deep black, ocean blue, chrome like mirrors, engines like sculptures. The room shifted. Someone whispered, "That can't be real." "It is," Clara said. "And I'm not selling them. I want to open a museum. Right here in Blue Hollow. We've all driven past that garage for years thinking it was dead. But it's not. It's history. And if we do this right, it could put this town back on the map." The room stayed quiet for a beat too long. Then the mayor's secretary, a woman named Denise, crossed her arms. "Sounds like a fairy tale. You expect people to just line up and pay money to look at some old cars?" "Not just look," Clara said. "Experience, stories, restoration classes, school field trips, maybe a diner next door. A place where people can learn and feel something real again. A place we can be proud of." Someone muttered, "Can't afford pride when the roof's fallen in." Clara swallowed hard. "That's why I need help. I can turn a wrench, but I don't know the first thing about museums, or foundations, or taxes. I need people who believe this place can be more than it was. People who want to be part of something that matters. A pause. Then Richie stood up, wheezing as he did. My daddy taught me to drive in a '49 Ford. He said, ain't seen one since I buried him. If what you're saying is true, then maybe this town's got one more story left in it. Clara blinked back tears. It does. I promise you it does. Over the next week, something began to shift. Word spread. People stopped by the garage first out of curiosity, then with purpose. Old mechanics dropped off spare parts. A retired shop teacher offered to help clean. Teenagers volunteered to paint walls, if only for a slice of pizza and a look at the cars. Even Evelyn brought her friends by after school, pointing to the covered shapes and whispering, one day, this is gonna be ours. For the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel like she was surviving. She was building. The days blurred into weeks, and the sound of hammers, paint rollers, and laughter began to echo through the walls of Whitaker Auto. It no longer felt like a tomb for buried treasure. It felt alive. Clara stood in the center of the garage, her coveralls smeared with primer and dust, hair tied up in a bandana. She was surrounded by half-covered classics, ladders leaning against walls, and people, real people working, helping, sweating for a vision they barely believed in a month ago. She hadn't asked for followers. But somehow, she'd found a team. Old man Richie now spent his afternoons in the garage's back room, cataloging the cars by hand in a yellowed notebook Clara had given him. Teenagers from the high school painted walls and polished chrome. Denise, the same woman who once rolled her eyes, had offered to help with business licensing. Even Sheriff Mullins donated a vintage gas pump he'd had rotting in his barn. Clara had never asked for help in her life. Never had the kind of trust that allowed it. But slowly, day by day, she learned to let go, to delegate, to listen, and to believe. One Thursday afternoon, as the sun poured golden light through the repaired windows, Evelyn walked in, holding a hand-drawn flyer. At the top, in big bold letters written in crayon, grand opening Whitaker Heritage Garage. Clara smiled. Baby, what's this? I made it in art class, Evelyn said proudly. We're doing a project on people who make history. Clara knelt down. And you picked me. Evelyn nodded. You're fixing something old and making it mean something new. That's what my teacher said heroes do. Clara's throat tightened. She kissed Evelyn's forehead, then hugged her a little too long. Later that night, long after everyone had gone home, Clara stayed behind. She walked the rows of cars, flashlight in hand, stopping at each one. She ran her fingers along the hood of the gullwing, then the leather seats of the Porsche. They no longer intimidated her. They inspired her. She saw them not as museum pieces, but stories, markers of effort and artistry and endurance, the same things she was learning to see in herself. At the back of the vault, she stopped at Bernard's desk. The leather-bound ledger still sat open, his handwriting untouched. She flipped to the final page and added something of her own. In blue ink, opened to the world. August 12th. May these machines remind us not of what we once had, but of what we're still capable of building. Clara Monroe. She closed the book and turned off the light. The day of the opening arrived faster than anyone expected. The parking lot overflowed with cars from neighboring towns. Locals lined up early, some dressed in their Sunday best. The mayor gave a brief speech no one really listened to. People were too busy peeking through the garage doors, waiting for the reveal. At exactly noon, Clara stepped forward. She wore a clean pair of coveralls and an expression that barely concealed her nerves. She took the mic, cleared her throat, and looked at the faces in front of her, young, old, curious, doubtful. "My name's Clara Monroe," she began, "and until a few weeks ago, I was just trying to keep my daughter fed and my head above water." Murmurs in the crowd. Some nodded. "But I bought this place, and found a story bigger than mine buried underneath it." She gestured to the doors. "This collection ain't just about cars. It's about what's worth keeping, about what people once built with their own hands, and about what we can still do when we stop giving up on each other." She paused, swallowed her fear, and smiled. "Welcome to Whitaker Heritage Garage." The doors rolled open. Gasps filled the air. Inside, under newly installed lights, the classics stood in quiet reverence, gleaming, waiting. $100 million worth of legacy and a lifetime's worth of dreams. But the real miracle wasn't behind the ropes. It was standing in front of them. Clara Monroe, grease-stained, soft-spoken, and unbreakable, hadn't just restored a garage. She'd rebuilt herself. 3 months had passed since the garage doors first rolled open to the public. What had once been a forgotten structure with sagging beams and rusted hinges was now the beating heart of Blue Hollow. Tour buses rolled in every weekend. School field trips arrived with wide-eyed kids sketching Ferraris and asking if Mrs. Clara really fixed them all herself. Local diners stayed open later. The corner store stocked souvenir keychains with tiny cars on them. And for the first time in decades, people stopped saying there's nothing here and started saying, "Have you been to the garage yet?" But it wasn't the money that changed Clara. It was the stories. There was the veteran from Nashville who wept in front of a '67 Mustang because it looked exactly like the one he drove the day before he was deployed. There was the young woman from Ohio who brought her father, both of them car nuts, and stayed for hours admiring the engine work on a 1955 Benz. They left a note in the guest book. "You reminded us why we started fixing things together in the first place." And there was Evelyn, Clara's daughter, who now ran around the garage after school giving made-up tours to anyone who would listen. "This one," she'd say, pointing to the Bugatti, "used to belong to a spy." Probably. We can't prove it didn't. Clara would watch from a distance, wiping down a tool or taking notes for a new exhibit. She'd smile, not just because the garage had become something real, but because she had. One quiet evening, after the last visitor had gone and the lights had dimmed, Clara sat alone on the workbench at the back of the shop. The place smelled like metal, wax, and something sacred. She stared out over the rows of polished chrome and velvet ropes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to remember where she started. The nights she cried in the shower so Evelyn wouldn't hear. The meals stretched with rice and prayer. The jobs that paid late. The rent notices slipped under the door. The exhaustion. The loneliness. The fear that all of this might never be more than survival. And now, somehow, here she was. Not just standing, thriving. Because one day, she saw a wrinkled flyer on a bulletin board and listened to something deeper than logic. Something braver than fear. She listened to hope. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, the original key Red Callahan had given her. It was worn, dull, unremarkable. But it had opened more than a lock. It had opened a new life. She placed it in a shadow box next to the desk, under a handwritten label. The key that changed everything. A small act. A quiet gesture, but it felt like closure. Or maybe the beginning of something else. The next day, Clara found herself in front of a crowd, again this time, at the Blue Hollow Community Center. The mayor had asked her to speak at the town's fall festival kickoff. She hadn't prepared anything fancy. Just the truth. She stepped up to the mic. "I used to think people like me didn't get second chances," she said, voice steady, "that folks who work with their hands were only meant to survive, not build something that lasts." She looked out at the faces, tired, kind, hopeful. But turns out, When you stop hiding your story, when you start trusting others to help carry the weight, things change. Not overnight, but enough. She smiled. If you're sitting there thinking you've missed your shot, I promise, you haven't. Sometimes, all it takes is one cracked key, one broken-down building, and one moment of courage. People rose to their feet. And somewhere in the back, Evelyn stood on her tiptoes, hands cupped around her mouth, shouting, "That's my mom." The crowd laughed, clapped louder. And Clara, she laughed too, head tilted back, joy pouring from her like sunlight through open doors. Clara Monroe's story isn't just about discovering a $100 million car collection beneath a crumbling garage. It's about rediscovering herself through risk, resilience, and raw belief. Life doesn't wait for perfect conditions. Sometimes, it gives you a broken key and a busted door and asks, are you brave enough to open it anyway? Clara didn't have a roadmap. She didn't have wealth, connections, or even time on her side. But she had grit. She had a child depending on her, and she had the courage to say yes to the unknown. In doing so, she reminded all of us that second chances don't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes, they show up as broken-down buildings and miracles buried in dust. Because at the end of the day, it's not the value of what we find that changes us. It's the decision to look in the first place. The end? Up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to keep driving with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe broken things still deserve to shine.